Near the end of his life, Johnny Cash finally shared his thoughts on Elvis Presley. He had stayed silent for decades, watching quietly from the sidelines. When he spoke, it was honest, thoughtful, and full of insight about the young man behind the fame. What did Johnny Cash really see in the king of rock and roll? Join us to find out. The final truth Johnny Cash shared about Elvis. As he grew older and closer to the end of his life, Johnny Cash began to speak with a kind of calm honesty that felt deeper than anything he had shared before. When he talked about Elvis Presley, it was not loud, dramatic, or meant to shock anyone. It felt simple, real, and thoughtful, like someone finally saying what had been on his mind for a very long time.
The best performer, probably Elvis Presley. I don't think anybody could touch him. I never saw Hank Williams, who was one of my favorites.
He made it clear, in his own gentle way, that Elvis was at his strongest in the early days. Back then, there was no heavy control, no pressure to fit into a certain image, and no need to impress the world. Elvis was just himself, standing with a guitar, creating a sound that felt alive and different. Cash remembered that version of him very clearly, and it stayed with him even after everything changed. He did not speak as someone judging from the outside. He spoke as someone who had lived through similar moments, someone who understood what it meant to rise, to be seen, and to carry expectations that never seemed to end. Because of that, his words felt careful and honest at the same time. He was not trying to bring Elvis down, and he was not trying to lift him higher than he already was. He was simply pointing to something that felt true. In his reflection, it became clear that he valued the raw and simple side of music more than anything else. He believed that the early sound Elvis had was pure, something that did not need extra layers to shine. It came from feeling, from rhythm, and from a natural gift that could not be taught. That was the Elvis he held onto in his memory. As time went on, Cash noticed that things began to change. The music grew bigger, louder, and more shaped by outside influence. It was no longer just about the voice and the guitar. There were more sounds, more control, and more expectations. Even though Elvis continued to succeed, something about that early spark felt harder to find. Cash did not say this with disappointment. Instead, there was a quiet understanding in the way he expressed it. He knew that fame could slowly reshape a person's path. It could bring success, but it could also take away some of the freedom that made the beginning so special. He had seen it happen, not just to Elvis, but in his own life too. What made his words powerful was how gentle they were. He did not try to correct the way the world saw Elvis. He simply added another layer to it. He reminded people that before the fame, there was a young man with a natural presence that could hold a crowd without trying too hard. That presence did not come from practice alone. It came from something deeper. There was also a sense of respect in everything he shared. Cash never spoke as if he knew better than everyone else. He spoke as someone remembering a friend, an artist, and a moment in time that meant something to him. That made his reflection feel warm instead of harsh, honest instead of critical. As he looked back, it seemed like he was holding on to a version of Elvis that the world had slowly moved away from. Not because it was forgotten, but because it had been covered by everything that came after. Cash gently uncovered that early image again, allowing it to be seen clearly. His thoughts carried a quiet message. Greatness does not always grow with fame. Sometimes it is already there from the very start, before anything is added to it. In his eyes, Elvis had already reached that level early on, long before the world gave him a title or placed him on a higher stage. By sharing this, Cash was not changing Elvis's legacy. He was deepening it. He was showing that behind the success in the image, there was a simple beginning that mattered just as much, if not more. And that idea slowly settles in, making you see Elvis in a different way. And just as this calm truth begins to sink in, it raises a quiet curiosity. If Johnny Cash saw something so special in Elvis from the very beginning, what exactly happened the first time he watched him perform? And how did that single moment stay so clear in his memory for all those years? The first time Johnny Cash saw Elvis in Memphis. Long before bright lights and loud crowds followed him everywhere, Elvis Presley stood on small stages where everything felt close and personal. It was in one of those early moments that Johnny Cash first saw him. There was no big introduction, no special setup, and no heavy expectations. It was just a young man performing in front of people who were curious, excited, and unsure of what they were about to witness. Cash watched closely, not as a fan, but as someone who understood music deeply. He paid attention to the little thing, the way Elvis held his guitar, the way he moved without forcing it, and the way the crowd reacted without needing to be told how to feel. Something about it stood out immediately, even though nothing about the setting was grand. Elvis did not behave like someone trying to prove a point. He seemed relaxed, almost natural, as if performing was something that came to him without effort. He repeated songs, kept the rhythm steady, and allowed the sound to carry itself. There was no need for too many words or extra actions. The energy in the room grew on its own. What caught Cash's attention the most was how people responded. They were drawn in, not because they were told to be, but because they felt something real. It was not about perfection. It was about connection. That kind of response cannot be created by force, and Cash recognized that instantly. As someone who was also finding his own path in music, Cash could tell the difference between something planned and something genuine. What he saw in Elvis was not shaped or controlled. It felt fresh, almost surprising, like something new had just appeared without warning. That feeling stayed with him. Even in that simple moment, Cash noticed the strength in Elvis's presence. He did not need a large stage to stand out. He did not need many instruments to support him. His voice, his rhythm, and his natural confidence were enough. That alone made a strong impression.
He had a lot of rhythm. He was a very good singer, and he was a fabulous performer, and the way he moved the people.
As time passed and Elvis's fame grew, this early memory became even more important to Cash. While many people focused on the later success, the big performances, and the global attention, Cash held on to that first image. To him, it showed the true foundation of who Elvis was as an artist. There was also something else that made this moment special. It was pure. Nothing had been added to it yet. There were no outside voices shaping the sound, no pressure to meet expectations, and no need to fit into a certain image. It was simply a young artist expressing himself in the most direct way possible. Cash did not forget that feeling. Even years later, when everything around Elvis had changed, that early performance remained clear in his mind. It became the standard he measured everything else against. Not in a harsh way, but in a way that helped him understand the difference between the beginning and what came after. This memory explains why Cash later spoke the way he did. It was not just an opinion formed over time. It was based on something he had seen with his own eyes, something that left a lasting mark. He had witnessed the raw version of Elvis before the world shaped him into something bigger. As you begin to picture that small stage, that simple setting, and that quiet moment of discovery, another thought starts to grow. If this natural and effortless version of Elvis made such a strong impact on Johnny Cash, how did their path cross as they both rose in music? And what kind of understanding began to form between them as two artists walking similar roads? The quiet respect between two music legends. As both men continued their journey, their names began to travel further, but their beginnings were not so different. They came from similar backgrounds, raised with sounds that were simple, emotional, and close to the heart. Gospel music shaped them, country sounds guided them, and both carried a deep sense of rhythm that felt natural rather than forced. They found themselves moving within the same music circles, especially in the early days when everything was still growing. There was no heavy competition between them. Instead, there was a quiet awareness. Each one could see something real in the other. They did not need long conversations to understand it. It showed through the music. At places where musicians gathered, including the environment around Sun Records, their paths overlapped more than once. These were not grand meetings filled with attention. They were simple moments where artists shared space, sound, and sometimes even songs. In those spaces, respect grew, without needing to be spoken loudly. There was a natural difference in their styles, but that difference did not create distance. Instead, it added balance. Elvis carried a strong stage presence and a sound that reached wide audiences quickly. Cash, on the other hand, leaned into a steady, deep tone that connected in a different way. Yet both sounds came from a place of honesty, and that is what mattered most. Cash saw in Elvis someone who could hold attention without effort, while Elvis recognized in Cash a voice that carried weight and meaning. This silent recognition built a kind of respect that did not need public display. It stayed between them, steady and genuine. As their fame continued to rise, the world began to place them in different spaces. Elvis was pushed into larger stages, louder performances, and a wider spotlight. Cash moved along a path that stayed closer to his roots, even as he grew more known. Despite these changes, the early understanding between them did not disappear. There were moments when they shared the same room, surrounded by other great talents, creating music without pressure. These moments were not about proving anything. They were about feeling the sound, enjoying the rhythm, and being part of something that was still fresh and growing. In those settings, their connection felt most natural. What stood out in all of this was how simple their respect remained. There was no need to compare, no need to compete, and no need to speak loudly about it. It was built on what they had seen in each other from the beginning. That kind of respect is not easily broken, because it is not based on success alone. Cash never lost sight of who Elvis was when he first saw him, and that shaped how he continued to view him over the years. Even as the world changed Elvis's image, Cash held on to that earlier understanding. It allowed him to separate the person from the pressure that came with fame. At the same time, he could see that their journeys were slowly moving in different directions. Not in a negative way, but in a way that showed how fame can shape each artist differently. One path became louder and more controlled, while the other tried to remain steady and grounded. This growing difference did not erase their connection, but it did add a new layer to how Cash viewed Elvis. He began to notice changes more clearly, not just in the music, but in everything that surrounded it. And because he had seen the beginning so clearly, those changes stood out even more. As you start to understand this quiet respect and the path they shared, another thought begins to form. If their bond was built on something so real and simple, what exactly changed as fame grew stronger? And how did Johnny Cash truly feel as he watched Elvis move further away from that original sound he once admired so deeply? What fame did to Elvis? As Elvis's name grew bigger, the spaces around him began to change. The small stages were replaced with larger venues. The simple setups gave way to fuller productions, and more people became involved in shaping his music. What once felt natural and free slowly became guided by plans, expectations, and decisions made beyond just the artist himself. Johnny Cash noticed this shift, not as an outsider, but as someone who understood how the music world worked. He had seen how attention could grow quickly, and how that attention often came with pressure. For Elvis, that pressure was even stronger because of how fast his popularity spread. Everywhere he went, people expected something bigger, louder, and more exciting than before. At the beginning, Elvis's sound was built on simplicity: a guitar, a steady rhythm, and a voice that carried emotion without effort. That was enough to hold people's attention, but as time went on, more layers were added. Instruments increased, arrangements became more detailed, and the music started to feel less like a direct expression and more like something carefully shaped. Cash did not see this as a failure. Instead, he understood it as a change that often comes with growth. Still, there was a part of him that quietly held on to the earlier version of Elvis. That original sound had a certain closeness to it, something that made listeners feel connected without distraction. As the music became bigger, that closeness seemed harder to reach. There were also new responsibilities that came with Elvis's level of fame. Decisions were no longer made by one person alone. Managers, producers, and industry expectations all played a role. This meant that even if Elvis wanted to keep things simple, it was not always easy to do so. The direction of his music began to reflect more than just his personal choice. Johnny Cash could see how this kind of environment might affect an artist. He had experienced his own struggles with expectations, though in a different way. Because of that, he did not judge Elvis harshly. Instead, he observed with understanding. He knew that staying true to one's original path becomes more difficult when many voices are involved. As Elvis moved further into films and larger productions, his image also began to change. He was no longer just a musician on stage. He became a figure that people watched, followed, and expected to perform in a certain way. This added another layer of pressure, one that went beyond music alone. Cash seemed to feel that something important was being covered, not lost completely, but placed behind everything else. The raw energy, the natural rhythm, and the simple connection were still there somewhere. But they were no longer the main focus. They had to share space with many other elements that came with success. Even with all these changes, Cash never denied Elvis's talent. He still recognized the strength in his voice and the impact he had on music. But he also held on to the belief that the purest version of that talent showed itself most clearly in the early days. That belief stayed steady over time.
That magic, that a great performer needs to get the people right there. Elvis always did that.
There is something quiet but powerful in the way Cash reflected on this. He did not try to correct the path Elvis took. He did not suggest that things should have been different. Instead, he simply pointed out the difference between what was and what came later. That difference, in his eyes, told an important story about fame and its influence. He seemed to understand that success can sometimes add more than it should. It can build layers around something that was already complete in its simplest form. And once those layers are in place, it becomes harder to return to that original state, even if the desire is there. As you take in this gradual change, it begins to feel less like a sudden shift and more like a quiet transformation that happened over time. It invites you to think about how easily something pure can be reshaped when the world starts paying close attention. And just as this understanding settles in, another question begins to rise gently. If Johnny Cash could see these changes so clearly, how did he connect them to the deeper struggles that often come with fame? And what did he truly understand about Elvis Presley that many people never fully saw? The struggles Johnny Cash understood too well. At the same time that Elvis Presley's music was changing, Johnny Cash began to notice something deeper, something beyond the sounds, the performances, and the bright lights. It was the subtle way fame reshaped a person, the quiet pressures that no audience could see, and the private battles that even the most famous artists had to face. Johnny Cash understood this better than most. He had walked his own path through the music world, experiencing both attention and expectation, and he could see exactly how they affected someone like Elvis. Elvis did not just gain fans, he gained responsibility. He became a symbol, a figure who carried the hopes, the excitement, and the expectations of millions of people. Everyone wanted something from him, and everywhere he went, eyes were waiting, measuring, and judging. For a young man who had once performed simply for the joy of the music, this sudden weight must have been overwhelming. Cash could see how that burden slowly reshaped the way Elvis expressed himself, both on stage and off. There were the obvious changes first. Elvis began spending more time in Hollywood, making movies and adjusting to scripts, costumes, and scenes that were often far removed from the music he loved. His life became scheduled, planned, and controlled in ways that left little room for spontaneity. The casual freedom he once had, standing on a small stage with just his guitar, was replaced with a world of managers, contracts, and public appearances. Cash watched quietly, noticing how the young man who once seemed effortless was now navigating something heavier and more complicated. But it wasn't just the professional demands. Fame brought isolation. People admired Elvis, but they also separated him from the life he had once known. Those close to him often became distant, intentionally or not. He had to trust managers, publicists, and teams to guide decisions that used to be his alone. Even friendships could feel filtered through the lens of fame. Cash, who had himself felt how public attention can interfere with private life, recognized this clearly. He understood that talent alone does not protect anyone from the subtle loneliness of being watched constantly. Cash also noticed the small, almost invisible compromises that fame can demand. The sound that had made Elvis unique, simple, authentic, raw, was sometimes altered to suit audience expectations or studio demands. He watched his natural instincts were shaped by schedules, producers, and popular trends. For someone who valued authenticity in music above all else, this must have been difficult to navigate. Cash recognized the tension, wanting to remain true to oneself while being pulled in countless directions. Despite all of this, Cash's respect for Elvis never wavered. He could see the challenges without judging them. He recognized that even under pressure, Elvis retained a kind of integrity that only someone truly talented could maintain. The moments where his voice still carried that original spark, even beneath layers of production and planning, were proof of that. Cash admired not the polished image alone, but the resilience it took to continue performing while under so much scrutiny. Cash also reflected on the emotional weight behind the public image. Elvis had grown up in a world that was humble, simple, and filled with personal hardships. Suddenly, he was thrust into a life where every action, every decision, and even every note was observed. The joy of music, once an escape and a personal expression, could now feel like a responsibility. Cash knew from experience that this can quietly change how someone experiences life and art. He understood that fame is not just applause, it is also a constant demand, an invisible weight that sits on the shoulders of those who carry it. Yet, in his reflections, Cash never spoke with bitterness or anger. He did not try to blame the industry, the audience, or even Elvis himself. Instead, he simply observed. He watched a young man grow into a global icon while carrying pressures most people could not imagine. Cash's perspective was informed by empathy, born from having lived in a similar world of attention and expectation. He could feel, in a way few others could, both the triumphs and the hidden struggles that came with being a legend. At the same time, Cash noticed the choices Elvis made, small or large, that revealed his character. Even under immense pressure, Elvis sought moments that felt real to him. He returned to music he loved. He performed with energy that reminded audiences of his early days, and he kept elements of his original sound alive, even if the spotlight sometimes dimmed them. Cash saw that these choices were not easy. They required balance between survival, public image, and personal fulfillment. Cash also reflected on the isolation that fame brings to relationships. Trust becomes complicated when everyone around you has a role to play, whether it's friend, assistant, or manager. People can be well-meaning, but their interests are often tied to business or public image. Cash recognized how difficult it must have been for Elvis to maintain authentic connections while living such a high-profile life. This is why he often emphasized that his admiration was not only for the public performer, but for the human being behind the stage, facing challenges quietly, out of sight. One of the most striking things in Cash's reflection was the way he connected these pressures to creativity. He understood that artistic freedom is fragile and can be eroded when the world insists on defining an artist's output. He could see how the spark that had made Elvis unique in the first place was constantly under negotiation, not because of a lack of talent, but because of circumstances beyond his control. Cash admired the courage it took to keep performing, to keep creating, and to keep connecting with people despite all of it. By the time Cash shared his reflections, it became clear that his perspective was shaped by more than just observation. It was shaped by experience, empathy, and memory. He saw not only the fame and the challenges, but also the human choices behind them. He recognized the tension between public image and private life, between expectation and authenticity. And he understood that the story of Elvis Presley was more than applause and success. It was a story of resilience, persistence, and the quiet strength it takes to remain true to oneself under pressure. As these thoughts settle, it becomes clear why Cash spoke so carefully about Elvis. He was not simply sharing an opinion. He was offering insight into what it takes to navigate extraordinary fame, how a person changes under attention, and how a young artist can still retain the core of who they are despite all the external pressures. It invites the listener to consider not just the image of Elvis Presley, but the human experience behind it, and to understand the subtle weight of greatness that only someone who has walked a similar road could truly see. And as you reflect on this quiet understanding, another question begins to arise naturally. If Johnny Cash could see so clearly the hidden struggles behind the fame, what did he notice in Elvis that remained untouched, pure, and untamed? Those qualities that kept the essence of the original artist alive, even as the world tried to shape it. Why Cash stayed silent for so many years. Even as Elvis Presley became a global figure, with stages bigger than he could have imagined and lights that shone brighter than the sun, Johnny Cash never lost sight of the young man he first saw on that small stage. Beneath the crowd, the cameras, and the carefully crafted image, there remained a spark that had drawn him in years earlier. A spark of music born from simplicity, honesty, and pure presence. Cash knew that this spark was not created by fame, nor could it be taken away. It had always been part of Elvis, quietly alive under every layer of success. What Cash admired most was how that spark continued to shine in unexpected moments, in songs that still carried the raw rhythm of his early performances, in gestures that reminded audiences of his natural charisma. Elvis held pieces of himself that no production, no schedule, and no public expectation could erase. Cash could recognize it instantly because he had seen it firsthand, and because he understood the language of music that comes straight from the heart. That authenticity, fragile yet persistent, was what made Elvis remarkable in Cash's eyes. Johnny Cash reflected on how difficult it must have been for Elvis to protect that inner fire. Fame demanded compromises, and life under constant observation rarely allows an artist to move freely. Yet, even within those constraints, Elvis found ways to remain connected to the essence of his art. Cash saw these moments as acts of courage, choices that showed the human side behind the legend. He did not measure greatness by success alone, but by the ability to preserve the core of who someone truly is, even as the world pressures them to conform. It was this understanding that made Cash's reflection so powerful. He did not need to dramatize the story, nor did he need to sensationalize his admiration. His observations were gentle, personal, and honest. He spoke not as someone judging from the outside, but as someone who had walked a similar path, feeling the weight of expectation, the pull of public attention, and the challenge of staying true to oneself. He saw Elvis not just as a star, but as a person navigating all of this with determination, skill, and a sense of authenticity that never fully disappeared. However, what remained clear was that greatness is not only measured by fame or the size of the audience. Sometimes it is measured by the ability to stay connected to the original spark, the part of a person that makes them unique before the world intervenes. Johnny Cash understood this, and in doing so, he offered a quiet, thoughtful perspective on Elvis Presley. A perspective that reminds us that behind the legend is a human being, full of talent, choices, and a spark that can survive even the heaviest pressures. As Cash's reflections settle, the story leaves a gentle but lasting impression that the true heart of an artist is often found in the earliest, purest moments, and that recognizing this is the deepest kind of admiration. And just like that, the memory of a small stage, a young man with a guitar, and the quiet honesty of music lingers long after the applause fades. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.